Salutations! My restored Halo 2 Juggernaut encounters video was received tremendously well. However, one of the encounters that I uncovered in that video, specifically the one with the cut Marine squad going up against the Juggernaut in Quarantine Zone, got me thinking. What else is tucked away inside Halo 2's campaign that didn't see the light of day? Welcome to Halo 2 Uncut, a mini-series on this channel as well as the name of this Halo 2 mod that aims to analyze and restore as much cut content from this game as I feasibly can. For this mod, I wanted to take this multiple steps further compared to what was accomplished in the Juggernaut Encounters video. Not only am I going to re-enable the other encounters and squads in general, but I'll also be reintroducing a whole assortment of other forms of cut content, as well as elements that appeared in the Director's Cut cinematics that were included with Halo 3's Legendary Edition. Something to keep in mind when witnessing all of this cut content. There could be a wide variety of reasons as to why one thing was cut from the game, but try to remember what console Halo 2 is being developed for. The original Xbox. You might question why Bungie's mission designers opted to cut these two shielded jackals from this alleyway in Outskirts. You're likely thinking to yourself, 2 jackals? That's not hard. Why did they cut them? It's no secret that Halo 2 had a turbulent development history, and Bungie was trying the best they could to keep the game running as smooth as possible on the original Xbox. It's likely that these numerous small infantry cuts were made to keep the game's frame rate stable. I'm not going to pretend that I 100% know what I'm talking about when it comes to how game engines work, but from my point of view, one singular enemy AI unit comes with a lot of information to calculate. Its art assets, its AI behavior, what weapon it's using, as well as the projectiles that come from said weapon, all of that and more are factored in. Now, multiply this by 4, which is the typical squad size in Halo 2, then have say 3 or 4 enemy squads in a given area. That's 12 to 16 AI in a given encounter that the game needs to pull information from. And that's not even counting friendly AI squads. That's child's play for modern games, but again, Halo 2 is running on a console that only utilized 64 MB of RAM alongside a 733 MHz processor, just to put things into perspective. And Halo 2 was already pushing the console's limits. Concessions needed to be made when they were required. Anyways, we have a lot of information to cover today, and for this first part, we'll be looking at the cut content that would have appeared in the first 3 levels of Halo 2, which include Cairo Station, Outskirts, and Metropolis. Let's begin. I did mention that I'm taking things a few steps further compared to my Juggernaut video, and this is one of them. For this series, I'll be including pre-release versions of Halo 2's weapons and vehicles as added spice for these beta encounters. The functions that I've chosen for these weapons come from the private alpha, the private beta, and other external media, and the ones I've ended up using for the video were the renditions I found to be the most interesting. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Dragonflare921 for his continued development on assembly plugins for the Halo 2 private multiplayer alpha and beta builds that we have access to. Having these made documenting the stats of these older weapons and vehicles so much easier, and his work only made this cut content project that much better. We'll start with arguably the most Halo 2 weapon ever, the battle rifle. Of course, I had to reference the single shot battle rifle seen in Halo 2's E3 2003 demo. This rendition of the weapon is a special case because the assets for it are custom made, but are still heavily inspired by said demo. The animations for this weapon were made by members of Z-Team, and the port was done by Sean T, the founder of VKMT. The rest of the weapon statistics were drawn from the Halo 2 private alpha, which still had access to the exclusively single-shot battle rifle. It featured a 12-round magazine, fired at a rate of 4.5 rounds per second when spamming the trigger, was capable of carrying 144 rounds of reserve ammo, and each singular round dished out 15 points of damage compared to the final game's 6, which when factoring in the 3-round burst, comes out to 18 points of damage for each trigger pull. There's also the rendition of the battle rifle seen in the Halo 2 private beta, which featured 2 firing modes, a single shot mode when zooming in through the scope, and a 3-round burst when out of scope. I'm a lot more nostalgic to the E3 BR however, so that's the variant I've opted to use for the video. Next is the Needler, which draws from its Halo 2 beta counterpart. It sports a faster fire rate, firing between 9 to 11 rounds per second compared to the final game's 8, and a slightly larger super combined prerequisite of 9 needles compared to the final game's 8. But the biggest difference lies with its wild projectile velocity. Each fired needle starts traveling slowly upon being fired, then suddenly rocketing away at 5 times the initial velocity. It goes from 6 world units per second to 30 world units per second within half of a second. It makes the weapon much more viable in the player's hands, especially in multiplayer matches, but I'm assuming this was dialed back heavily due to how tricky it was to dodge AI-fired needles in the campaign. If you thought the final game's plasma pistol was broken, you haven't seen the betas. Its charge shot might have had a weaker tracking ability, but it traveled twice as fast in the air, flying at 10 world units per second compared to the final game's 5. But the projectile itself had splash damage, expelling its plasma damage through a pretty wide area of effect. It's even capable of stunning multiple shielded elites with one shot, making them all vulnerable to headshot weapons soon after. I'm glad this was changed. The plasma rifle is the only weapon that I'm mentioning in this part where I opted to not use any of the pre-release values for this mod, and allow me to show you why. It's all in the projectile velocity. To put things into perspective, the final game's plasma rifle projectiles have a velocity value of 14 world units per second. Let me begin with the Halo 2 Beta's plasma rifle. In that build, the plasma rifle projectiles traveled at 25 world units per second, the same as Halo 1's plasma rifle in fact. Well, what's the problem, Vadam? You're a huge Halo 1 stan, aren't you? Surely you see how much better this makes a plasma rifle. You're correct, YouTube comment section. At surface level, this seems like a pretty notable upgrade. It takes one of Halo 2's underappreciated sandbox elements and turns it into a very competent shield stripping weapon at range. But there's one thing that needs to be considered. The enemy AI have access to this buffed plasma rifle too. There's no fun strategy to counter this setup, or any real hope to try to dodge these projectiles while on the move. You'll just get shredded no matter what. Halo 1 is able to get away with having the plasma rifle fire projectiles this fast because the enemy AI aren't nearly as cracked in the firing pattern department as the Halo 2 AI is. It's way more forgiving to tango with elites in CE considering they don't fire the weapons that fast, nor do they have near perfect leading accuracy like the Halo 2 elites have. It also helps that Master Chief has a lot more health in Halo 1 than he does in Halo 2, sporting 75 shields and 75 health in Halo 1, while in Halo 2, he has 70 shields and 30 health. All of this being taken into account, you would have a very miserable experience if the plasma rifle was configured this way in the final game. Oh, but I'm not done yet, because we still have to get to the Halo 2 Alpha. If you thought the Halo 2 Beta plasma rifle was OP, hold on to your butts. The Halo 2 Alpha's plasma rifle projectiles traveled at a whopping 100 world units per second. To put things into perspective, that's actually faster than Halo 3's assault rifle projectiles, which traveled at 80 world units per second. I don't think I need to explain how bad this would have been. Basically, rewatch the last few minutes, but imagine it being 4 times worse. It's almost like going up against human weapons. Moral of the story is, I didn't want to make this mod genuinely unfun to play from start to finish, and I've opted to instead just keep the pre-release versions of the plasma rifle to this video. I eventually plan to release this mod for people to play, and my goal is to primarily showcase the cut encounters. Having either of these plasma rifles would have been a consistent detriment to the experience, and while there are some encounters that I restored that end up being pretty terrible on their own, at least those experiences only happen once. Going back to the Halo 2 Alpha plasma rifle for a bit though, I have a theory for why this weapon had such fast projectiles in multiplayer. Halo 2 was originally going to include a multiplayer mode called Warfare. This would have essentially been a lot like Halo Reach's Invasion mode, with the UNSC and Covenant being different teams, but on a much larger scale. It's possible that the plasma rifle had this projectile velocity value as a means to balance the weapon versus UNSC weapons like the battle rifle or SMG, as a plasma rifle would have been a likely candidate to be the Covenant player's starting weapon. However, Warfare was cut pretty early on in Halo 2's development, and the Halo 2 Alpha build that I've been mentioning was compiled in November of 2003 and was tested in January of 2004. Warfare was likely long dead by this point, so I'm not 100% sure if my theory holds any water, but it was worth a shot. Anyways, finally moving away from the plasma rifle, I'd like to mention 2 cut weapons that'll be featured in today's video. There's currently no evidence regarding where these weapons were going to appear in the campaign, but considering they were planned to be in the game at some point, I wanted to include them. The first is a General Purpose Machine Gun, or GPMG for short. This is one of the 2 weapons that were added to MCC's multiplayer shared map in 2020. It's a portable version of the UNSC's machine gun turret, and it has just as much stopping power. However, the GPMG sports a 40-round magazine, and the weapon is considerably inaccurate compared to the mounted version. The weapon also includes a placeholder HUD, using many of the battle rifle's HUD elements while using the SMG's reticle from the E3 2003 demo. And the chosen weapon animations are the sniper rifles. The speculative way I incorporated the GPMG into the campaign was to have it drop when a turret was destroyed, much like how the turrets in Halo 3 and onward functioned. The other cut weapon is the suppressed SMG. Like the GPMG, it too was added to MCC's shared map in 2020, but it's been publicly available since the release of Halo 2 Vista's editing kit in 2007. It's almost a carbon copy of the regular SMG in terms of function, but there are key differences. Weapon tags in Halo have what is called a firing noise setting, and this controls how well AI can hear a weapon when it's fired. The suppressed SMG has the silent setting enabled, which makes it nigh impossible for enemies to detect users of this weapon based on sound. For comparison, Halo 3 ODST's suppressed SMG actually uses the medium noise setting, which eludes the user from detection of far away enemies, but anyone in close proximity will still be able to hear the weapon being fired. The suppressed SMG in Halo 2 is also considerably more accurate in short bursts than the regular SMG is. Lastly, dual wielding this weapon is broken, and I might have an idea for why this is. The weapon was likely cut before the official implementation of dual wielding was added to Halo 2. The SMGs seen in Halo 2's E3 2003 demo are not two separate SMGs being dual wielded by the player, but rather a single weapon tag emulating the feeling of holding two SMGs. Certain Halo Custom Edition maps have a dual SMG weapon just like it, just so you can see exactly what I mean. I brought this up because a Halo 2 multiplayer alpha build does not have dual wielding in any shape or form, but the Halo 2 beta build does have dual wielding, meaning it was implemented at some point in time between the alpha and beta. Another thing I like to point out is the SMG in the alpha has a default reserve ammo set to 100 spare rounds, while the suppressed SMG weapon tag also has a value of 100 rounds. There's a very likely reason why this 100 value is here despite it not being divisible by 60. Marcus Lato recently uploaded footage of the Macworld builds to Halo 1 on his Twitter page, and one of the weapons he uses is the SMG that was originally going to make it into that game. And if you count how many rounds are in the magazine, it's actually 50 rounds, which is a number that 100 is divisible by. This likely means that both of these SMG variants were originally going to have 50 rounds per magazine at some point, and that's why the reserve ammo is set to 100 on pickup. Moving on to the vehicles, we have the Ghost, which draws from its Halo 2 Alpha counterpart. Its guns fire at the exact same time like it does in the E3 2003 demo, and at a slightly slower rate of fire, but the main difference comes from a cut overheating mechanic that the Ghost was originally going to have. After about 7 seconds of fire, plasma will vent from the sides of the vehicle and the player won't be able to fire for about 3 seconds. This would have radically changed the way the Ghost was used, and probably not for the better, so I'm glad this was cut. The Banshee won't be used by the player during the first 3 levels, but it still makes an appearance, so I'll mention it anyway. This iteration draws from the Halo 2 beta Banshee. Just like with the Ghost, the Banshee's guns fire at the exact same time, but the Banshee bomb behaved very differently. After about half a second of being fired, the projectile will start to plummet to the ground with a bunch of gravity applied to it, making the Banshee bomb a primarily close-range option. The last vehicle I like to talk about is the Wraith, and it's an entirely different beast which references how it behaved in the Halo 2 Alpha. Its trigger behavior uses a charge-up sequence rather than firing immediately like it does in retail. The user holds the trigger for 1 second, and while that happens, a charging effect that is similar to the Scarab's charging effect plays by the Wraith's mortar turret. The Wraith will then fire the projectile after the charging sequence is complete. I can see why this was cut. It only delays the firing sequence without adding any benefits for the Wraith pilot. Charging up the mortar doesn't make it any stronger, and the Scorpion is already much more viable than the final game's rendition of the Wraith, so cutting this gave the Wraith a boost in viability. Before we finally move on to the cut encounters, I'd like to talk about one more weapon that won't be featured in the encounters for this video, the Covenant Carbine. It has 2 different pre-release iterations, and I'd actually like to take this opportunity to ask you guys which one you'd like to see used for future episodes, as well as the mod itself. First, let's talk about how the Carbine functioned in the Halo 2 beta. Like the Halo 1 pistol, as well as the Needle Rifle in Halo Reach and the VK-78 Commando in Halo Infinite, it was a fully automatic precision weapon. It also had a 36 round magazine like the final game's battle rifle, and its projectiles had a unique trait that had a very high instantaneous acceleration value applied to it, allowing the weapon to push certain objects when continuously firing at them. The other pre-release iteration of the Carbine resides in the final game's version of the weapon tag, but goes unused. Once re-enabled, it turns the Carbine's trigger behavior into a dual firing mode much like the battle rifle seen in the Halo 2 beta. When scoped in, the Carbine fires in single shots like it does in retail, but when you're not using the scope, the weapon fires in 2-round bursts, allowing the weapon to potentially kill more than one enemy with a single trigger pull. I'd like to throw up a poll, and it'll be up to you guys to determine which of these variants I should use in the future. Let me know in the comments below. Comments are good for the YouTube algorithm after all. I did not expect to fall into the cavernous rabbit hole that I ended up going through when I started working on this project, and I'm glad I did. There's so much hidden trivia that I got to excavate, and I was so happy to witness each and every one be reborn, at least to the best of my ability anyway. I can't guarantee that the following content is 100% the way Bungie intended it to be during Halo 2's development, but I'm confident that at least most of it is pretty much what they had in mind. I'll also be implementing various elements seen in the director's cut cinematics. While it doesn't technically count as cut content, Joseph Staten said during the developer's commentary for those cinematics that he wished that he had more time to implement more polish into Halo 2's cutscenes, so I like to include them since we're on much better hardware than the original Xbox now.
Your new suit's a Mark 6.
But I mean, I remember that distinctly just being heartbreaking for everybody on the team when, you know, when we realized it was just too late. It wasn't that time to put that polish on the game, and that was pretty heartbreaking for everybody.
Let's begin with Cairo Station. During the opening cinematic, I included camera flashes from the news drones that surrounded Johnson and the Master Chief. It's not the exact same effect used in the director's cut, but I at the very least did my best to time each snapshot as close as I could to the original versions. Moving on to the gameplay, we make our way to our first encounter. During the third wave, there's the two elites dual-wielding the plasma pistols. However, there are going to be 3 grunts included in the squad, one of which being a plasma turret user. However, having all 3 grunts spawn didn't allow them to pathfind properly whenever the elites would push them out of their way, so this is likely why they were cut. The gunner grunt also didn't have a point set placed on this floor that would coax it to deploy its turret. Point sets are markers placed on a level by the mission designers, and they're typically referenced in scripts to have something go to it, and in this instance, it could be used to command a grunt to deploy a turret in this spot. So I placed a custom point set in this spot here to have a grunt deploy its turret on this floor to use it against the marines across the room. Having only the turret grunt spawn ensured that the grunt's pathfinding didn't break. Shortly after this, there's the 4th wave. It would have included another heavy grunt using the turret. There are 4 pre-placed point sets that go unused in the final game, and the gunner would have chosen between these 4 spots to place the turret. There was also going to be a 5th wave added to this encounter, but it was cut. The only remaining reference to it is a commented out AI place command for a squad named 1st Cov Wave 5, but when looking through the scenario tag squad list, such a squad doesn't exist, meaning we'll never really know what units are going to be used for this squad. So what I ended up doing was having one of the previous squads respawn to make a new 5th wave. Moving on to the next area, there were going to be 2 dressed marines wielding magnums inside this room, and there would have been a marine manning the machine gun turret instead of him being dead on the floor. Downstairs to the right, near this elite by the back wall, there was a cut squad consisting of 2 grunts. We won't see our next cut encounter element until the second hangar room, where a squad of 3 grunts was to spawn by the 2 gunner grunts on the top platform. Further along in the mission, when you meet up with Miranda and Johnson, a squad of ODSTs was to come through the doors to the right to offer cover fire, and would then proceed to escort Miranda and Johnson to the in amber clad. After the bugger section, you make your way outside into space where the ranger elites are, and to your left, there was actually going to be a banshee swooping in to attack you. This banshee is interesting, not just because it would have appeared so early in the game, but also because it's set up to not be hijackable by the player even if the player gets close enough. The pilot is another ranger elite, and you can see its jetpack clip through the top of the vehicle. A funny quirk about this banshee encounter is that the vehicle will clip through the Covenant boarding craft that are in this area due to them not having any collision. This was likely cut due to a combination of jank that came with all the aforementioned clipping issues, as well as for content introduction reasons. This level might have proved to be too early to introduce the Banshee for Bungie's taste, and they preferred it to have its first appearance take place in a later mission, which is in this case Metropolis. The last encounter in the bomb room has something rather peculiar here that was cut from the game. In the regular version of this map, there's a small pillar that stands next to the bomb, and this is where Cortana is supposed to appear during the cutscene. However, there are originally going to be 4 of these pillars in total, and each one would appear in the 4 corners of this room. The interesting thing about these pillars is that Cortana will appear on one of the pillars when you're in close proximity to the object, and when you walk to another one of these pillars, she'll dematerialize from the pillar she was just on and reappear to the newest one that you're close to. I don't really know what purpose this little event was supposed to serve, and I guess the mission designers didn't know either, hence why it was ultimately cut. Also, fun fact, even when playing on a vanilla unmodified copy of this level, this pillar object does not have a Halo 2 anniversary asset. Before we go to the ending cutscene, I'd like to bring up 2 more pieces of cut content. First, let's talk about the cut Warthog sequence for this level. This has been known about for a while now, and was even referenced in the director's cut developer commentary.
Your head now.
Now,
Oh, the pickle.
Jason, do you remember why we put the Covenant space pickle in Halo 2?
Okay, Jason, explain this
I
one.
just remember you were supposed to hitch it to the
Don't
back of it
wanna
and
know.
Jeep and drive it.
That's right, I forgot about
You
that.
were supposed to drive it all the way across the ship. That would have been awesome.
That would have been awesome.
The Warthog, the original space station, right, it was supposed to be a zero-G training facility where there was a big open environment with warthogs and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you were supposed to put the bomb in the back of a little trailer, right, that attached to the Warthog, and then drive it through the human space station.
That would have been fun.
That would have been good times.
That would have been awesome.
Players have been able to glitch their way into this Warthog in the past, but I bet you didn't know that something else relating to this sequence remains in the map. There's a script that references the Warthog attaching to a rail of some kind, and then playing some sort of animation. If we boot up Sapien, and go to where the Warthog spawn is located, as well as making Master Chief invincible so he doesn't die while inside walls, we'll see what happens when we enter a few commands from the unused script. When entering this script into the command line, the Warthog becomes invisible as it attaches to the rail, which is also invisible. If we enter this command, followed by this command, the invisible Warthog will begin to move forward along the invisible rail. It will continue to move all the way to the middle of empty space until eventually stopping. This could have been a test script that Bungie wrote when working out the logistics for the Warthog sequence before they decided to cut it. The other form of cut content that I wanted to bring up is a bunch of cut pieces of dialogue that are referenced in the map scripts, but unfortunately, their sound tags have been completely scrubbed from the game, so we can't hear what they would have sounded like. During the intro sequence, right before the first enemy wave shows up, there was supposed to be some grunts and snarls that were supposed to play after the "stand by their latch" line. Not really sure who or what was supposed to perform those, as the voice line designation has an acronym of GJC that I don't recognize. In the same area, right before Johnson's supposed to say "feel the fire on that bulkhead," he was going to say "everyone be cool" or something along those lines. Keep in mind that these dialogue entries will be written out one way, but the actual line will play out differently. For example, on Outskirts, Johnson has a voice line that says,
Understood. I'll keep an eye on him. Chief, good luck.
but the text entry in the script reads out, "Bye Chief, off to wuss." After going outside of space for the first time, Cortana and Lord Hood will have their exchange about the Covenant bomb that appeared on Cairo Station. Before Hood tells Chief to go after it, there would have been another exchange between Lord Hood and one of the admirals within the UNSC fleet. "Alert! The Covenant fleet is on the move. Orders, sir?" "Engage, Admiral." "Aye, aye, sir." Right before going out to space for the second time, there would have been some more back and forth between Lord Hood, the Admiral, and probably a crewman that would have been with the Admiral. Lord Hood would start off with the exchange by saying, "That's the last of the cruisers. Damn fine shooting, Cortana." Followed by the crewman saying, "Admiral, the point defense is too intense. My grid is max. I don't think," and then it would resume as normal with the Admiral saying, "The carriers are breaking through, sir. They're heading straight for the Cairo." Now we watch the ending cinematic, which features a bunch of new additions that I've added in reference to the director's cut cinematics. There's a lot more usage of dynamic lighting in the in-outer clad, some more effects playing out in space, and quite a bit more. I'll let the whole cutscene play in full for you now.
Me inside your head now.
How much time was left?
You don't want to know.
Cairo, this is an Ember class.
The carrier shield is down. I'm in position and ready for immediate assault.
Negative, Commander. Not against a ship that size. Not on your own.
Sir, permission to leave the station.
For what purpose, Master Chief?
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
Permission granted.
I know what you're thinking, and it's crazy.
So, stay here.
Unfortunately for us both, I like crazy. Just one question. What if you miss?
I won't.
Rick, he flew pretty good.
Chief, get inside. Gear up. We're taking this fight to the surface.
One more thing I'd like to bring up before wrapping up my coverage of Cairo Station is relating to the longsword bombing run that happens before Chief detonates the bomb. Bungie actually cut 3 extra explosion effects from this scene, and this cut likely happened because these extra explosions can overload the effects for the original 5 explosions that play in retail.
The message just repeats. Regret, regret, regret.
Any idea what it means?
Dear humanity, we regret being alien samples. We regret coming to Earth.
And we most definitely regret the Corps just blew up our raggedy-ass fleet! Hoorah!
Regret is a name, son. The name of one of the Covenant's religious leaders, a prophet. He's on that carrier and he's calling for help.
Immediate. Grid Kilo 2-3 is hot. Recommend mission abort.
Roger, Recon.
It's your call, Sarge.
We're going in. Get tactical, Marines!
Master Chief, get aboard that carrier. Secure the Prophet of Regret. This is the only place on Earth the Covenant decided to land. That Prophet is going to tell us why.
30 seconds out.
Stand by to...
Whoa.
Let me show you what I have done for the opening cutscene. I paid very close attention to all the audio and visual effects that were used in the director's cut version of this cinematic. It did my best to emulate what was shown there. I added some fire and smoke effects through the buildings during the initial Pelican scenes, as well as a few firing effects during the second half. The Amber Clad received some dynamic light. I hope the MCC fixes the muddiness of these shadows. It's a quirk introduced with the Vista port that remains in MCC to this day. Inside Johnson's Pelican, we see some ODSTs that replace the Marines. Not only is this a reference to the E3 2003 demo's introduction, but there's evidence inside Outskirts mission script file that says the player was going to be backed by ODSTs at the beginning of the mission. Big shout out to Sean T for providing me with a custom ODST helmet prop for this cutscene. Moving on to gameplay, right before we move up, I re-implemented a cut script that would have had Johnson play a move-up animation after he gives his orders. This was likely cut because a vast majority of players simply wouldn't see this happen unless they turn around. Let's take a good look at our modified squad. 2 ODSTs replace some of the Marines seen in the base game, but we also have the 2 Pelican pilots from the intro cutscene surviving the crash as well. In the same note stating that ODSTs would back the player, so too would the Pelican pilots, and they would opt to hang back while Chief, Johnson, and the ODSTs did most of the fighting. Fun fact, the pilot variant is technically in the realm of unused content. While it doesn't show up in gameplay, it appears in cutscenes, which were in-game for Halo 2. However, Halo 2's Anniversary mode does not utilize in-game cutscenes, which means this variant goes unused in Anniversary graphics. Despite this, The pilot helmet has an anniversary asset applied to it, but the design is nowhere close to its classic counterpart, or even the design used in the blur cutscenes. The helmet asset itself sticks out like a sore thumb due to the lack of PBR materials. This helmet is actually closely related to the Pelican pilot's helmet seen in Combat Evolved Anniversary. The design was likely going to be reused like how a lot of the CEA assets were refined and updated for H2A, but it appears as if Saber Interactive realized that this variant doesn't get used whatsoever during the in-game segments of Halo 2, so they stopped working on it as it would have been a waste of time and resources. We now move on to the wave defense portion of this level, and let me tell you right now, there's a lot to cover here. I'll try my best to showcase everything in the simplest way possible, so I'm sorry if it's tough to follow along. First, let me introduce you to these 8 enemy squad names right here on screen. These consist of the different Covenant squads that appear after the first enemy wave from the rooftops are killed. However, only 5 of these squads get used at all in the base game, and one of them was supposed to be a bit different at some point, and I'll talk about that soon. This wave defense encounter goes through 2 phases, one before the rooftop buggers wave, and one after the rooftop buggers wave. As you know, Sergeant Johnson uses various lines of dialogue depending on which wave appears.
Across the street, down low. We got jackals in the courtyard.
However, there was a cut set of script lines for this wave defense encounter that would have made Johnson much more vocal. Like I said previously, Johnson uses a specific line of dialogue depending on the wave, but he was originally going to use alternate variants of these lines depending on which phase the wave spawns in. Just to remind you, the 2 phases are pre-bugger wave and post-bugger wave, so to make things easier to follow, I'll refer to them as Phase 1 and Phase 2 respectively. Let's talk about the waves themselves, including the cut waves alongside the cut Johnson dialogue. We'll start with 2-0, one of the cut waves. This is actually the only one that doesn't have an existing spawn script written out for it, so I made a custom one that copied the others besides the squad name. Anyways, this Grunt and Elite squad is rather jank as it has spawn points that appear in plain sight by the windows of this building. I couldn't find any Johnson callouts for this squad, so it's the only one that lacks any. Next, I'm going to talk about both 2-1 and 2-6 at the same time because they're actually very similar. In the base game, they're both Elite and Grunt squads that make their way through the alleyways across the street from the holdout building. Squad 2-1 is the only one of these two that has any Johnson callouts play in the base game, and it's this line that plays in Phase 2.
Across the street, down low.
Okay, but hold on a second. I said this was an Elite and Grunt wave, so why are there jackals, and where's the grunts? In the mission script file for this mission, it states that 2-1 was originally going to consist of jackals instead of grunts, likely to help differentiate the wave from 2-6 more. Here's Johnson's cut Phase 1 line for the squad.
Down low, across the street.
Moving on to 2-6, this was planned from the get to be an Elite and Grunt wave. However, this squad actually doesn't use any Johnson callouts at all in the base game, and the lines that he would have used here were cut from the game. Here's his cut Phase 1 line,
Across the street, on the buildings.
followed by his cut Phase 2 line.
On the buildings, across the street.
Next, we have 2-2, our next cut wave. According to the mission script file, this squad was to be an Elite and Bugger wave that would appear on the rooftops across the street. This squad didn't have any spawn points set for it, so I placed some speculative ones that I think made sense. Johnson only has one callout line for the squad, regardless of which phase it spawns in.
Heads up, on the building.
Next is 2-3, which is the Grunt and Elite squad that spawns in the streets furthest to the left of the holdout building. Phase 1's Johnson line is used in the final game.
More on the street, left side.
However, his Phase 2 line was cut.
More, left side, street.
Our next cut wave, Squad 2-4, is yet another Elite and Bugger squad that spawns to the right side portion of the street towards the gate. Both of Johnson's lines for this squad are unused. Here's his Phase 1 line,
Counting these? Right side, in the street.
followed by his Phase 2 line.
In the street, right side.
Squad 2-5 is the famous Jackals in the Courtyard wave. The iconic Johnson line is his Phase 1 line.
We got jackals in the courtyard.
He has a Phase 2 line that was cut from the game.
Courtyard, jackals.
Since we went over 2-6 already, we skipped to 2-7, our last squad which goes unused in the base game. This one only makes up of buggers. It would have spawned at the tops of the taller buildings across the street. The Johnson line that would have been used for this squad is actually the same one used for the original Bugger wave.
Freaky mouth bit buggers heading over the rooftops.
Perhaps this was an older version of the Buggers over the rooftops wave before it evolved into what we have in the base game. Before we move on though, I'd like to take a look at the top of the Outskirts mission script file that talks about some general issues Bungie were facing during development. In the E1 section, which means the first encounter, one of the issues was regarding the length of the wave defense portion. Is it too long? Should I prune a wave out? Well, they did prune out a bunch of them in the end. Also while we're here, one of the general issues for the level is with the Jackal snipers being too hard. I don't think this issue was resolved. After we're done with the wave section, the Phantoms make a return to drop off enemy reinforcements. However, this scene was to play out much differently. Allow me to demonstrate.
Hang tight, everyone. Help is inbound.
You heard the lady. Grab some dirt.
Let him have There's another one.
Sergeant, I need you on that bird. My Pelicans are going to start airlifting armor and reinforcements into the city. They'll need an escort that isn't afraid of a little hostile ground fire.
Understood. I'll keep an eye on him. Chief, good luck.
Oh boy, this took a while to set up. As you know in the base game, Johnson is picked up by a Pelican in the next area after you kill the two hunters. However, Johnson was supposed to be picked up before the hunters arrive, and it wouldn't be a Pelican that comes to get him, but the cut Falcon instead. This is all outlined in the mission script document, which states that a Falcon comes in to drive the Phantom away, drop off Marine reinforcements, and once the LZ is clear, Johnson and the surviving Pelican pilots board the Falcon and evacuate the area. In fact, the Marine reinforcements that are dropped off by the Falcon, which go unused in the final game, are all that remains in the scenario tag of this cut Falcon sequence. This entire scene that you saw was not left over in the scenario and was scripted by me, making the execution of this scene speculative. Another aspect of this that was speculative are the rocket pods used by the Falcon. It was stated in the mission script file that the vehicle was supposed to scare away the Phantom, and I doubt it could have done that with just a machine gun. The leftover weapon tag for the Falcon is pretty much a carbon copy of the Warthog turret, but on the Falcon model exists two preset marker locations for a secondary trigger, and these were placed on the rocket pods, so I added a secondary rocket launcher weapon to the vehicle's weapon tag for some added spice. In an alternate universe where the Falcon doesn't show up, Johnson has yet another cut line about the two hunters breaking down the gate. After commanding someone to get a satchel on the gate, he says,
Never mind.
Behind the two hunters, there's a squad of 3 jackals that are commanded to watch you fight the hunters. Once the hunters are killed, the 3 jackals attempt to make a run for it back to where the other jackals are waiting. I also want to point out that in the script document, there's a reference to a not safe for work adult line of dialogue about the Marines fighting a hole. Classic Bungie. We won't see our next cut enemies until the alleyways. All the way to the end of the alley, where the jackal snipers spawn, there's an unused point set in place for a plasma turret to be deployed by a grunt. There's no spawn point for this grunt gunner, nor were there any scripts for it, so I made a speculative scene that has a grunt spawn at the start of this encounter. There's also a cut shielded jackal squad within these alleys, one to the left standing guard, and another to the right that burst out of a corridor. The Hotel Zanzibar scene was supposed to have medic marines, according to the mission script document, but there's no medic variant that exists in the game. The following aren't examples of cut content, but for fun, I wanted to include the ODSTs from Another Day at the Beach. For those who are unaware, Another Day at the Beach is a short film that was included in the multiplayer map pack disc for Halo 2. This showcased what happened to the troopers that weren't a part of your squad that survived the Scarab encounter. I paid very close attention to the classic version of this cutscene when implementing the elements of it to the mod. All 4 of the ODSTs that were featured in the film make an appearance, even the one that used the plasma pistol. I had them scripted to follow you after you meet up with them. At the end of the dark hallway, there's a cut effect event that called for a plasma grenade explosion. There was supposed to be a door at the end of this hall that the plasma grenade was supposed to destroy, but the tag for it no longer exists. At the hotel wreckage, I implemented more references to the Another Day at the Beach film, with the dead Jackal sniper and his beam rifle, and the plasma pistol that one of the grunts dropped when they panicked. On the other side of the building debris, there's the dead elite with a deactivated energy sword. Moving on to the vehicle section, the Covenant gun tower was originally supposed to be active, and was scripted to shoot at various points towards the buildings. The gun tower has an elite driver they can kill to get it to stop shooting. Towards the back of the area, the mission script file mentions that there's to be a parked creep, which is the internal name for Shadow, guarding the entrance to the next area. There actually is a squad used in this final game that has a Shadow in its name, but neither the Jackal sniper nor the grunt gunner spawn in one, so I added a third member to the squad that spawns a grunt in the Shadow's gunner position. Oh yeah, grunts do in fact have shadow animations for both the driver and gunner positions. They've had them since the E3 2003 demo is shown in this picture. In the same area, killing the enemy ghost will spawn another one if you're far away enough from the entrance to the next area. The second gun tower area once again has the giant vehicle active, doing the same thing as the previous tower. Fun facts about the gun tower. The tower itself makes up of two parts. The base, which is a scenery object, and the gun, which is the vehicle itself. Both of these objects actually have destroyed variants that go unused in the final game. This is likely a holdover from the E3 demo, when the longsword does a bombing run to destroy the active tower. I think this is the case because both model tags for the gun tower pieces don't have health and destruction data despite having destroyed variants, meaning it was likely going to be a scripted set piece from far away to see these variants like in the demo. In the next area, there's a cut Covenant squad that's pinning down the Marines atop of the bunker building. When approaching the tunnel entrance, Cortana uses a cut line of dialogue talking about it.
Perfect. The Covenant have already cleared away inside.
The mission script file talks about a grunt plasma cannon, as well as another Covenant shadow being a part of this encounter. So I placed a grunt gunner near the sniper tower, and had the shadow drive up to the entrance to the tunnel to begin guarding the entrance. We won't see our next cut squad for a little while. Shortly after the Scarab shoots at the Warthog, we come across a cut squad consisting of 2 shielded jackals and 3 buggers. Now for the final Outskirts segment of this video, the Shadow Run. The scripts for this segment reference an unused passenger sequence where any troops on the Shadow's passenger seats will get out if the driver exits the vehicle. If you're confused by the mention of passenger seats for the Shadow, it's because there's actually an unused passenger variant of the vehicle, which is weirdly enough labeled as the default variant. The fact it's labeled as default is likely why it has an anniversary asset. Saber probably opened the Shadow model and looked through the variant names and saw the passenger variant as the default one and made a model of the passenger seats not knowing it was unused content. So for fun, I decided to have 2 of the 3 Shadows be the unused passenger variant to show you what it's like to have the vehicle carrying troops. Their first Shadow consists of a grunt driver and gunner, as well as 2 grunts and 2 shielded jackals on the seats, and you can see how jank it looks through the jackals. On the third Shadow, I had 2 elites with 1 sitting on each side of the vehicle. Here's what a fully loaded Shadow would have looked like. When playing this segment on easy or normal, there's going to be a waypoint system in place that directs you to the closest Shadow. This was pretty much useless information, hence why it was cut. This Shadow sequence is going to be an absolute nightmare on higher difficulties, and that's because there was going to be quite a few more Shadows taking part of this encounter. In the base game, there's 1 extra Shadow that appears after passing the initial 3, but there were going to be at least 2 more Shadows that spawn alongside it, making 6 total during the run segment. There's also a cut script that determines how many Shadows spawn in that area. For example, if you killed all 3 of the first Shadows, 3 Shadows will appear in the next part. Or if you only killed 2 of them before reaching here, only 2 extra Shadows will spawn. It doesn't help the difficulty whatsoever that there was going to be yet another Shadow at the very end of the tunnel waiting for you next to the one that spawns in the base game. You could just have this massive dog pile of Shadows in this spot, and it gets so strenuous for the game that it could start garbage collection way sooner than normal and just delete most, if not all, the Shadows sometimes. I'm glad this was all good.
Oh, I know what the ladies like.
Metropolis is very special. Allow me to show you why. When getting into a vehicle, we'll notice that the Pelican is taking a slightly different flight path than it does in the base game. When you start to move up, the Pelican will actually follow you, providing fire support with its machine gun turret. Across the bridge, a second Wraith appears, and 2 Wraith mortars begin hurtling toward you. When making it to about the halfway point of the bridge ascent, the Pelican will break off and leave the area. The mission script file from Metropolis mentions Jackal snipers making pot shots towards your Scorpion as you make your way across the bridge. There's an unused squad block for the Jackal snipers, but no spawn points are placed. Also, funnily enough, when placing a spawn point and having the Jackal spawn as is, it spawns a shielded Jackal holding a human sniper rifle. Imagine if these were the main Jackal snipers. Anyways, I made a speculative scene where 2 Jackal snipers appear behind cover to start shooting you after the Pelican leaves. Now, this entire scene at the bridge apex was going to play out very differently. It was going to be this extravagant infantry ambush encounter. Behind one of the trucks, there's a squad of grunts lying in wait trying to spring an ambush. Inside the hole in the bridge, a squad of buggers was supposed to fly out and attack you. To the right side of the bridge, there was meant to be a small squad of elites that rush out to attack the player as well. However, the most drastic difference here revolves around the 2 phantoms that appear in this encounter. In the base game, these phantoms fly past the player and take potshots at you with their turrets before zooming off to the end of the bridge. One of the pre-release differences is that the right side phantom was also going to have a wraith just like the phantom on the left, but the real kicker here was that these phantoms were going to drop off infantry near the player before leaving. The infantry squad that's mentioned is E15 Cov Inf 0. This squad actually still exists in the scenario, but all that remains of it are a bunch of grunt heavies with plasma turrets, and I highly doubt 2 phantoms are going to drop off a total of 3 grunts. I suspect that these grunts were the result of a later encounter design after the phantom drop-off sequence was cut. One of the grunts spawns right on top of the rocket launcher marine that spawns there, so it's likely that the marine and grunt squads were placed at different points of development. As for my recreated phantom drop-off sequence, it's all speculative outside of the phantoms placing each squad on opposite ends of the bridge like it states in the document. The first squad consists of a standard group of grunts and a single elite. I got a bit more fun with the second squad. While there's no evidence of them ever being planned to appear on this level, I wanted to show you what it's like to have hunters appear in a Halo 2 tanks section. There's good reasons as to why you don't see this interaction in the final game. Not only are the hunters very susceptible to rockets and explosions in general, they're actually pretty scared of the Scorpion's turret. Halo's weapons, vehicles, and characters use a scariness value that determines how AI interact with whatever they're up against. If the scariness value for the opposing force is too high, the AI act much more timid. The Scorpion cannon in this case goes over the hunter's scariness threshold, and they lock up in fear whenever the Scorpion cannon aims at them. So for the mod, I fixed it so that the hunters actually engage you properly, and now we have our first Halo 2 tank vs hunter encounter. Hard to believe we don't actually have this in the base game, but it's true. The bridge descent scene plays out as normal until they get to the tunnel entrance. After killing the 2 wraiths, the phantom was going to make a flyby and shoot you with its turrets, and would break off when the turrets were destroyed. For the tunnel descent, there was to be an elite, internally referred to as the Last Stand Elite, crouching by one of the destroyed civilian vehicles as an act of defiance. Going further down the tunnel reveals a grunt gunner that was planned to make an appearance here as well. There are 2 possible turret deployment sites that the grunt picks at random. Along with this gunner grunt are some extra infantry units hiding behind the abandoned vehicles. It's here where we get to what I think is the most exciting part of this entire video. As you can see across the tunnel, there's a waterfall coming out of the ceiling. That's because this part of the tunnel was supposed to be flooded at an earlier point of Halo 2's development. Not only is this mentioned in the mission script document, it was even referenced by Joe Staten in the developer's commentary.
Did you get any Laura prep on?
Now, at one point, that part of the level was filled with water, wasn't it?
That's true. There was some water, yeah. At least one of those areas.
Jones and his anti-water ways. You used to like water so much, man, in Marathon. What happened?
Yeah, water's in one spot in the game, like 20 square feet of water, and it doesn't work in the last 2 weeks. It's one of the things that doesn't get fixed, sadly enough.
There's even a preset trigger volume called E17 in water, if I didn't already make my point any clearer. The water shader is actually unused content. It would have been used here if this entire segment wasn't cut. The water is speculatively placed by me, but considering there's a huge hole in the ceiling, I felt it made sense. 2 cut Cortana lines would have played upon reaching this area.
Your armor is watertight and your air supply is maxed. Unless you've eaten recently, you're free to go into the pool. If you crouch, the water's deep enough that they won't be able to see you.
To reference the second Cortana voice line, the gameplay segment that I created here is entirely speculative. Simply crouching underwater won't hide you from enemies due to the lack of collision, so I wrote a bunch of scripts and created a new trigger volume to create a completely custom stealth sequence relating to the water. When you're either standing up or completely out of the water, you're inside my custom trigger volume and enemies will see you. But if you're crouched, you leave my trigger volume and enemies won't be able to detect you until you kill one of the enemies. Evade their detection for about 7 seconds and enemies won't be able to find you again when crouching. This encounter was going to solely consist of jackals and elites, since they're tall enough to stand above the water, with the exception of the grunt gunner that was also cut from this area. However, I'm unsure if this gunner was here during the time this tunnel would have been flooded or after the water was cut, but I added it anyway. Before we move on to the next section, I have to give huge shoutouts to Shelley herself, Bartholomew, and Crisp for helping me get all this set up. This wouldn't have been possible without their assistance and I'm eternally grateful. We won't see a cut encounter until the second part of the park section, where a second Wraith is perched on this platform. The mission script talks about there being 2 Wraiths for this part, one by the exit and the other on top of a platform. That was pretty vague, so I speculatively placed a second spawn here, which gave the Wraith the best sightlines against the player. Also in this area, the ghost reinforcements are going to be airdropped by a Phantom instead of driving here on their own, so I made a custom flight path for a Phantom to drop off more ghosts after the initial ones die. The hospital siege encounter has a ton of cut content associated with it. The first one is this Phantom carrying a Wraith. It's scripted to be shooting the hospital building with its turrets. The problem is the Phantom turrets are separate entities that use generic turret AI, so they can't be controlled via scripts the same way standard AI can. So what we're left with is a Phantom just staring at different points of the building. It's also stated in the mission script that one of the Wraiths that's present in this encounter would be dropped off by this Phantom. So I had it carrying one of the Wraiths, and when the Phantom notices the player, it flies to the original spawn point for that Wraith and drops it off. This Phantom is scripted to leave when you destroy its turrets, and you can make some funny jankery happen when you time this properly as the other Phantom flies in to drop off the ghost reinforcements. Likely one of the reasons why this Phantom was cut in the first place. Speaking of ghosts, there's supposed to be a small squad of them covering the Wraiths at the start of this encounter, but they were cut from the game. As the cut Phantom is on its way out, a cut squad of marksman marines at the top of the hospital building would appear to provide long-range support. However, they're scripted to go back into the building when the encounter is done, but oftentimes the doors won't open for them, so they're stuck walking in place until you open the door for them. We're not quite finished with this area, however. Off to the left side of the hospital siege encounter, there's an entire cut side encounter involving a parked shadow, a bunch of Covenant infantry, 3 ghosts, and a squad of 2 marines pinned down behind the abandoned vehicles. Everything except for the shadow, which needed its assets to be re-implemented into the map, were already set by Bungie, but it was all ultimately cut from the level, likely because at this point, there was so much AI in this entire encounter that the original Xbox might have been struggling to maintain a steady frame rate. Since this scene was off to the side from where the main action was taking place, there was no need to have all this here taking up resources. When the Scarab begins its assault on the hospital, we can see a squad of marines held up on top of each side of the street. 2 with turrets, 2 with rocket launchers, and 1 crouching behind the Scorpion. As the Scarab begins charging its weapon, all of the marines begin firing on it, but to no avail. As the Scarab passes by us, we can see that it has 2 turrets mounted on its flank. The Scarab has an unused variant that has 4 Phantom turrets mounted on its body, with 2 on each flank. Eagle-eyed fans can actually see this variant in the opening cutscene for Outskirts, so in a way, I'm kind of restoring some continuity here. Now it's time for the final segment of Metropolis, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. A cut squad of 3 marines can be seen at the second platform waiting for the Scarab to arrive. Overhead, there's a cut Pelican sequence that has 2 of them fly overhead, but it's so quick and off to the side they can only really see one of them easily. Now, onto the Scarab itself. Once it passes underneath the first platform, the 2 turrets will then activate and attack you and your marine allies, and you can lock onto them with a rocket launcher to take them out. This is likely one of the reasons why there's so much rocket ammo present in this encounter. Here's what this looks like in anniversary graphics, by the way. Since these turrets are the same ones that appear on Phantoms, they naturally have anniversary assets. However, the shaders simply don't mesh well with those of the Scarab's hull, and they stick out fairly easily. Once the Scarab passes the last bridge and finishes with its 90-degree left turn, the Phantom turrets on its left flank begin to activate, and surprisingly, its top anti-air turret activates as well. While this is happening, 2 assault pelicans appear from across the waterway and begin firing a barrage of missiles against the Scarab. Fun fact about the Scarab's AA gun: the projectile that I chose for it is actually not what it came with originally. If I were to use the unmodified variant of this, the turret would fire a Hunter's particle beam, but the marker for where the projectile is fired from it is wildly offset. This is because within the weapon tag for this turret, the checkbox for the projectile appearing at the weapon's origin is not checked off. Basically what this is referring to is whenever someone is holding a weapon, the fired projectile will appear in one of 2 locations. If the aforementioned setting remains unchecked, the projectile will shoot directly from the center of wherever the camera position is. You can see this happen a lot with projectiles in first person, and is the reason why the projectiles fired from player characters are so offset from the gun. It doesn't look pretty, but it provides the best form of gameplay for the first person perspective in the Halo games. However, if you check this box off, all projectiles will accurately fire from the weapon's primary trigger marker, which is typically located by the weapon barrel. So when we check this off for the Scarab's AA turret, it properly shoots out of the barrel. The issue is that the particle beam doesn't last long enough in the air to reach the pelicans on the opposite side. And because I wanted to keep some level of consistency between this scene and the Outskirts cutscene, I opted to have it shoot the Phantom projectiles at the same fire rate as the turret in the cutscene, and these actually reach the pelicans. We then get to what I think is the coolest part of this entire cut sequence. The Scarab was originally intended to use its Scarab gun to fire at the opposing pelicans. The Scarab will choose one of the 2 pelicans at random, and as the walker begins its charging sequence, the targeted pelican will perform an evasive maneuver and dodge the incoming charged particle beam. The pelicans will continue to fire their missiles against the Scarab, and will stop doing so when the player jumps onto the Scarab. We finally reach the end, and it's totally possible to have the Master Chief hold the GPMG in the cutscene, and it looks badass. I'll end this segment of the video with the ending cutscene, where I've added more director's cut references with added dynamic lighting within the in amber clad bridge.
That's right, you mothers! Run!
Not if we can help it, Sergeant.
Extract the chief and return to an amberclad.
Roger that. Status.
Sir, the Prophet is bugging out. Request permission to engage.
Negative, Commander. I'll vector 2 heavies for Starside intercept.
Bam! Slip space rupture off the target's bow. It's going to jump inside the city.
There's no time, sir.
Green light to engage.
Punch it. Get us close.
Ma'am, without a destination solution.
We are not losing that ship.
And that's going to wrap up this video. Once again, let me know in the comments below regarding which variant of the Covenant carbine I should use for the next installment of this series. If, and only if, you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, leave a comment about your thoughts on the content, subscribe for more Halo content from this channel, and hit the bell icon to be notified when my next video is uploaded. I also have a Patreon where you can voluntarily donate to further support the channel. I like to thank my Segili Zealots, as well as counselors Joe Antonetti, Cone Lord Daytona, Lauren Kleckner, Rad Mayan, and Kyle Dielman. This is the Vengeful Vadam, and I'll see you on the great journey.